Welcome to Inside Tax Policy. I'm Sindhu Bloom. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the workforce and the implications of tax reform on the workforce. And joining me to talk about it is Scott Olsen, our Global Human Resources Services Leader. Welcome, Scott.
It's great to be back with you, Sindhu.
So let's start with an overview of some of the issues that are facing companies when it comes to workforce.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the technical issues in tax reform that are impacting people. But the interesting stuff's later on. So let me go through that quickly first. First of all, there's changes to 162M, the executive compensation rules, and I'll sum that up by saying it's going to get bigger, and the exception for performance-based income's going away. So a little bit more work for companies to do there. There will be changes to companies' globally mobile workers as well because of changes in individual taxes. In some cases, that will be a good answer. In some cases, it won't be as good an answer, but it will impact mobility policies. And then there's some minor changes to fringe benefits, things like transportation expenses, meals and entertainment, and maybe most importantly, moving expenses, which will be an impact first for some clients. So those are some explicit things that impact the workforce that are in the actual Reform Act itself.
Okay. And talk about some of the implications then.
Well, the other part are more indirect. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was the impact of the benefits of tax reform to companies, right? We're hearing about repatriation of large amounts of cash. We're hearing about increased profitability that many of our clients are seeing. And there's an opportunity there, right? There's a lot of different ways they can deploy that dividend, but there's an opportunity here in the workforce. And I think it's a nice lead-in when we think about some of the things at the World Economic Forum last month and the focus on reskilling, the focus on lifelong learning. That was a big focus in Davos, and it's an opportunity for companies to take some of that benefit from tax reform and invest it. We also know CEOs are very concerned about skills gaps and about the war for talent coming back. And so using some of this to invest in their future, make sure they're getting the right talent, that they're keeping the right talent, and they're and developing that talent and reskilling it, we think is a big opportunity, and one that's a longer term play and a real investment as opposed to some of the things we've seen in the headlines like, throwing everybody $1,000.
Right.
I call that the blunt instrument. I call the investment more the surgical, where you can really target how you're going to use that. And it should develop benefits for all stakeholders over time.
Well, are you hearing from clients that they are going to do that? Is there talk of investment in the workforce?
There is, I think there is some. And again, I think some of it is things people were already thinking about, and tax reform is going to just make it maybe a little bit easier ROI because the money's there. And in some cases, I think it's a bit of a catalyst for it to say, hey, we do have this, let's be thoughtful about how we deploy this benefit.
Okay. And any other challenges that our clients are facing?
We also know, and I know you've talked with others on it on Inside Tax Policy about location, right? We're seeing manufacturing perhaps move, wider changes in supply chain because of tax reform, even location of IP and some of those things. Though anytime any of those things happen, there are people issues. And so I would say what our clients are facing there is, depending on how those locations are changing, what's the availability of talent and skills in those new locations? What's the impact on this globally mobile population? If you've got people that you've sent to England and now you need to send them to the Middle East or somewhere, what's the implications of that on policy and on immigration policy, on lots of things? So anytime there's movement of assets, there's going to be movement of people, and that's going to raise issues for the workforce as well.
So I know that we're only a few months in after the tax reform bill was signed into law. So I imagine that you've not seen a lot of activity in the realm of like moving, displacement, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we're kind of still, a lot of our clients are still in the planning phases for that, right?
Okay.
There was the big rush of things about how do we just, get things done for the end of the year. As these things continue to unfold, it's important to be thinking about those people issues as you're doing some of that planning, as opposed to saying, okay, here's our plan. Oh, wait a minute, we got some people issues to deal with as well. So it needs to be part of the process.
Those can turn into very expensive issues.
They can.
So let's turn to one of my favorite topics, automation. I want to find out from you what clients are talking about, what their biggest concerns are, because this is changing the landscape of work.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to reskilling on that, right? So we did a bunch of research last year about people's attitudes towards technology and automation in the workforce. And as not surprisingly, it's a bit of a yin and yang.
Right.
There's some concern about, hey, is my job going to be here in 5 years? But there's also this sense of, hey, I better get learning. And this could actually make my life easier. I could be able to do more interesting things, and automation can make things easier. So I think I would go back to the notion of reskilling, of saying, how are companies going to enable their employees to be in that digital world? We have a saying, jobs may change, but the need for people and talent isn't going to change. It's just going to have to be different types of skills. The other thing I would say is whether you want to call it man and machine or brains and bots or however you want to put it, it does force some different management policies into place, right? What do you need to do with governance and organization structure? What's your succession and your recruiting plan? You're not going to need as many people at certain levels. So how do you develop that workforce plan that's integrated with your automation strategy? We tend to see our clients pursuing automation and pursuing their people things and not bringing them together. So I think being able to integrate that a little bit more is really important. And also creating a transparent vision for your organization of what the role of automation is going to play in your workforce, so that people understand it, they can relate to it, and they can decide how to prepare for it.
And I imagine the issue of integration, you would have to deal with that at some point because you can't keep those two separate.
Yeah, I mean, how do you manage a bunch of bots as opposed to managing a
Right.
bunch of people? In some ways it might be easier, but in some ways it might be more challenging.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be with you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.